Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Anchore open source team gardening session live stream that we do every Thursday-ish. We missed last week. Was it Thanksgiving last week? I think it was. So we skipped last week. And we've only got one more left before the end of the year, before we shut down for the end of the year. So make the most of this and next week, and then everyone gets a break. So introductions, we have Keith, Will, Dan, Alex, and Chris from the open source team. They look after these fabulous pieces of software here, Syft and Grype. These are the flagship tools, the main event. But there's a whole load of other tools around this, like Stereoscope and Clio and all kinds of other stuff that these wonderful people maintain. And aided by a community of people who report issues, provide us pull requests, ask questions, give us advice, ask for future roadmap items, all that kind of good stuff that you get in the open source world. And everyone's welcome. Feel free to ask questions in the chat. If you can't make it to this video, you can always watch it later on at double speed. So, the time passes faster. But you'll find all the information you need about all of us at anchor.com/open source, the webpage that's open on your screen right now. And you'll also find all the repositories over on GitHub. If you look under our org, github.com/anchor, there's some handy links down there to discussions on Discourse. And Discourse is easily found at anchor.com/discourse. There's also some recent blog posts from there as well. And I post every time we do one of these streams, I post a little announcement in here, and I also put it out on our social stuff. So we've got Syft and Grype are on Twitter, Mastodon, and now Blue Sky as well. And Blue Sky followers has massively overtaken Mastodon. So that's interesting. And we put announcements out there, so you can follow us over there. We've got links to those in Discourse as well. So what we usually cover in here is, well, we start off with any updates. I don't think we did any releases this week, did we? So there's nothing on that side. Might be a release soon, but we'll talk more about that later maybe. And then we'll dive into needs discussion. If there's any specific issues anyone wants to bring up, they can just drop a link in the chat or ping us in some way, and we'll crack on. There's some chat here that maybe I should be looking at. Is that right? Where do we want to start? Alex, Chris, whoever has something they want to talk about, dive in.
I do have somebody brought up that there's a PSA of Grype DB schemas v3 and v4 will be deprecated come January 25th. These have been around since 2022, so they've not been used in a while. V5 has been used for a very long time. So I don't think this is going to impact like 99.99% of folks out in the world.
Is it that
That's
announcement?
the one.
Right, cool.
Yes. So it's just the PSA out there. I don't think there's anything else there. It's just wanted to shout that out.
Nice one. Thank you. So we obviously have the big list of needs discussion. We also have some responses down here. Where do we want to start? Anyone else? Anyone for anyone?
The first one that came up when we were doing triage this week, I jumped into our chat. It's 3462.
Oh my god, I scrolled far too far away on the chat.
In what repo?
Oh, I see it.
It's under Syft. Yeah, I can. Yep. Thank you, Keith. Pasted it to the bottom. We can pull that up on the screen.
There we go.
So I'll give a quick summary of the pull request. This user contributed OS information where available, but only for SPDX. The comment I gave back was that we probably have to discuss as a team how we want to elevate the distro information that we keep in the core model into the package list, or how we want to reflect that as a package if we're going to add it to packages, which would then get reflected into the formats of CycloneDX or SPDX. What we don't want to do is we don't want to generate the SBOM through our like SBOM as a library kind of functions and then mutate it even further. The more mutations that we do in the format encoding packages, the harder it is to stay consistent with our core model, and the more lossy we get between encoding and decoding back and forth between the formats in some ways. So we want to keep it nice and zipped up closer to the core. And yeah, I just wanted to pop this to the top for discussion from everyone of what we want to do here.
I mean, so what this looks like to me is that this is creating a package that represents like the operating system, but there is a primary. So for SPDX is that primary purpose field, and they have one slated for operating systems. So when it comes to like separability, like we can, it is separable. Like we can encode it out, create this package, and then when we decode, if we're ever coming back and converting again, like we can say, primary purpose operating system filtered out because it doesn't fit into the core model of like packages. So it sounds like that's kosher. Were you asking, is there a better spot or a new spot we should be putting this into the core model that doesn't exist, or?
Yeah, I think we've gotten some feedback before where people have done an SBOM in all three formats, and they've been like, okay, SPDX has 10 packages, Syft has 8, and CycloneDX has 11 or 12, right? And when those numbers are different, because there's not like a very succinct way to describe how, when going between different format encoding models, a package could get added or subtracted based on the nuances or, the wants or needs of the data model, it leads to some confusion down the line. So when this PR got put up, I was kind of like, okay, I understand the need for wanting the OS represented within that package list, because that's where some users would believe that should be declared and read from. But if we are going to accept this, I would want us to formally recognize like doing it in the Syft model where we have an operating system package that then gets converted over, rather than, to your point, Alex, taking the distro and mapping it to like the primary purposes field or something like that.
Well, today we already have some precedents today where we take which is the source object, and we make a packet, like it synthesize a package for SPDX, and we list the primary purpose as like container, whatever that primary purpose is. And so this kind of falls in that same vein where it's like, hey, the format. So like in Syft core model, we have a source object, and the Syft core model, we have a distro object. These are like their own primary separate types, and SPDX has decided to go the route of, they are packages. And so we're kind of like adhering to the spec in that regard, where we take the different types that we have in our core model and we're just translating it to, packages that have different primary purposes, is probably a-okay. Like it's, in other words, we already have it represented in our core object. It's just not a package like SPDX has decided to do it. And we already have a strategy to go to and back. Like, so I think we dropped that synthetic package for the container. And so in the same way we could drop the package for OS or convert it into a distro object like what we already have.
I think today that would just automatically happen because it's checking the types when it's reading that in, right? So if it was a OS type, it would just, like today, it would drop it just already.
So it sounds like the enhancement in this PR that's probably missing is at least converting that back to a distro object. Okay.
It is using the primary package purpose field in this PR as operating system. And yeah, like the inverse, right? Going backwards and converting it back to distro so that when you go out and back, it all does the same thing. I don't know. I still can't square the nature of getting like an extra package in one format when that package doesn't exist in the original core model list. So I guess I want to talk about that and maybe be convinced that it's okay if the list of packages are different between the formats. Like if I were to generate a Syft JSON and I would generate SPDX JSON and everything else being equal, if SPDX JSON is +1 because of this, this entry in the code, that's an okay direction to go with the program.
I think that like we don't have to have the same rules like in the Syft JSON spec. It's not really a spec, but Syft JSON has a distro object. And if you scan an image, we populate the distro object. But my understanding is that SPDX doesn't have anywhere to put the distro object, and there's an expectation that like the sort of main package carries that information. Is that did I understand that right? I'm coming to this issue from a pretty big distance. I'm just trying to make sure I understand it right. I don't think there's a great reason to like think that everything has to have like the set of things that SPDX considers a package is different than the set of things that Syft.json considers a package. So they don't emit the same numbers of packages. And that seems okay to me. I think also if you look at, is it CycloneDX where files are like artifacts, everything's an artifact, including files?
Yeah. Well, you have
components.
Yeah, you have components and you have files. I think they're siblings to each other in that format. And
the components, though, it's a similar thing. I think was what you're saying, Will. Like the component has a type that could be file or it could be package, and so like there's a bunch of components, but we have different data models for those things in the Syft side.
Right.
And so I would just like echo that. I think it's fine for there to be different counts of things because the formats are different. I mean, another example is even between like CycloneDX and SPDX. Like relationships, for example, we might dump a whole bunch of things in SPDX because it supports them, and CycloneDX doesn't have those because the format is just different in a specific way. And I would just mention one other thing. I put a link in our chat here, but we are doing this with CycloneDX, where we're outputting an OS component for the distro. So this would just be aligning the SPDX, I think.
So then I guess I want to put forward one more question. Is the Syft format in its current best form? Should we maybe also convert the distro into some kind of package, or is that duplicating too much information? Are there CPEs and like metadata that could go in the package list that would help downstream vulnerability providers if we package the OS that way? Like, do we just take the full step and do it for all formats? Or are we okay with this kind of like boundary existing between the two?
Well, I think that the way I'm thinking of it, I kind of want to invert the burden of proof and say, like, why should every format have the same number of buckets and the same criteria for what goes in each bucket? That seems like something that would have to be proved to me. But I think that the files example is interesting, right? Because today in CycloneDX, files are components. So like the Syft.json has, 50 packages and 500 files, and then the CDX SBOM will have 550 artifacts, 50 of them of type package, and I keep saying artifact, I mean component, 50 of them of type package and 50 of them of type file. And this seems very similar that like, Syft is sort of focused on container images, at least at its inception. And so the like, what distro is this is like a core thing in our data model. But like SPDX is more general. And so the fact that this is, Red Hat, there's just a package called Red Hat Enterprise Linux that exists in this file system. And like, I don't know, those both make sense. And I don't understand why they need to be the same.
For me, I feel like my rule of thumb on this is if it's not separable, then like we probably have an issue. So like in other words, if I encode something a format bespoke way from Syft to the format, and I can't decode it and separate it back out again, that's probably a red flag. Like we should be able to like make them separable. And like, so the SPDX spec has made these things separable. They have the primary purpose for container, operating system, library, archive, file, like that kind of stuff. And so all those things are separable if we decided to encode it in that particular strategy for SPDX. if there was something, so I don't know what the thing would be that's not as a primary purpose right now that isn't covered,
Right.
but like, I don't know, VM. So I don't know, that kind of already fits underneath some of this actually. Like, I don't know what that example would be, but that would be where I'd go like, yeah, I don't know, that needs either a new type in Syft to represent it, but then we would be scratching our heads as to how to even put it into SPDX anyway. It'd be like, or if I encode it to a package, but I can't detect that it's not a package going back to Syft, then like maybe we should never encode it into a package going to SPDX. But that's where I feel like the line gets drawn.
I
Right.
agree with that. And I think it's a strong premise because you can actually test, right? You could actually establish lowest common denominator of information where you don't have the problem of lossiness when converting between formats and verify symmetry, right? You could take like a cyclone, convert it to SPDX and then convert it back, and you should have the same thing as long as we avoid anything lossy in terms of information, and do the same for Syft. So the premise you just described, Alex, is also testable, which I think makes it powerful.
Okay. This is all good feedback for how to go about furthering this PR. So I think the go up. Sorry, Keith, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just want to say that the next steps are to make that burden of proof that Alex just outlined. Make sure we can go back to the Syft format from what the changes were made, and then actually get that test in. And then Keith, what were you going to say? Sorry.
I just want to mention that I heard another sort of like question there that we didn't really talk about too much, which was like, should these things be more like be packages in Syft, or be maybe more like packages, or something along those lines. And I wanted to also like mention that, I mean, we've had some other things that we've talked about, like the source supplying package information that goes there, right? And like having that flow all the way through to the resulting SBOMs. And this seems like pretty similar to me. And I don't know exactly what the answer is here, but like I do feel kind of strongly like, even if they're not, like, we don't treat them as packages per se in the Syft model, if we can do the same types of things that we can do with packages, like to some degree, make relationships, whatever else, like, and kind of translate them to the other formats as packages and back, like that to me seems like a really useful kind of strategy.
Yeah, and just to double click on that, like Keith, I think of what you're, because I think I remember some of these conversations. It was like having a Syft package object on a source object or on a distro object. Like so there's still a distro object. It's a superset, but then within that would be a Syft package to capture common information like license, copyright, CPEs, pearls.
Yeah.
When we go to places like SPDX and Cyclone, where they have all those same kinds of things, like it would be a good spot to tuck that information and then be able to bring it all back without losing it. I think it was that conversation. Is that right?
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going. Yep.
And I think the thing to separate out there from like is it a package in Syft, is that it ends up not being in like the package catalog. Like these aren't packages that ever go into the catalog, and so they don't make it out into like the artifact section. And I think that's the difference between what we're talking about earlier and Keith, what you're saying. Oh, Chris, you have your hand raised. Sorry.
Yeah, I just before we end on this topic, I wanted to address Will made a comment about inverting and putting the burden of proof back on why should the packages have equal amounts in each of them. And I thought of one good reason. When you're doing like the kind of downstream scanning and consuming the SBOM, if you took the same image source and you ran SPDX, Cyclone DX, and they had generated packages for the operating system in some way, and the vulnerability scanner was able to pick up on that and report some kind of vulnerability against that from either generated CPs or other metadata. But then you had Syft, and it only had the distro or only had the source, and that wasn't handled because it wasn't in that list of things to analyze. Then there's like, there's a holistic, like keeping everything that's being analyzed in the same spot. We handle edge cases in Grype by going into different objects in Syft SBOM and doing analysis against them. But I'm thinking of other tools that might just only take directly from the artifacts or components list. And if you want, but that, I mean, at the end of the day, I've kind of convinced myself out of that because there's pros and cons to all the formats, and why you would use one over the other is already varied. So kind of moving an inch in the other direction to try and keep consistency is kind of like a Sisyphusian like exercise when you could just do the proving encoding and decoding backwards and forwards and have like a logical consistency within your own code base and not worrying about downstream tools.
Well, let's still look on that for a second, because I agree. Here's a good example that came up a few years back, which is like, hey, like we don't output. So when we make a SBOM for a container image, like some tools they make packages that represent the layers, and then so it would be each instance I have 10 layers, then I'd have 10 packages, and then all the packages found in each layer are then related directly to those. So like if I had 100 packages and 10 layers, I'd have 110 packages. And we ended up not going that route because we're saying, oh, well, they're not separable. And in hindsight, like we do actually have a way, like either they extended out primary purpose to include like archive type, or it was there, we didn't see it. Because one way that we could have gone forward is we could have still had that kind of hierarchy there and separated that out when we like decode those things. So like, in other words, if I have those 10 extra packages in SPDX, we could have like filtered those out on the way back and it wouldn't have really been an issue. Or another way to put it for Chris, what you were saying is like other tools that are using this stuff is, well, if the primary purpose, if they're not looking at the primary purpose field and reasoning about filtering out things, then like, yeah, if they look at a package that represents a file and they try to do a bone scan as if it was a package name, then that would be wrong. We would tell them, oh, here's an issue upstream, here's a bug. Like you have to filter out by primary purpose.
I put it in the chat here, but just like for the primary purpose didn't come around until SPX 2.3 also. So like when originally we were implementing support there, like that was one of the decisions. Like we can't, like these aren't packages. We don't have a way to differentiate them, like the layers and stuff. So that was definitely like an influencing factor there.
So we can go back and do that now. Hooray.
Okay. Any further points, or Chris, do you have everything you need for that?
No, I have a good direction going forward and what I can offer Jose here in the comments, and maybe even like a contribution to get this over the line. So thank you everyone for the help.
That's
nice
cool.
one.
I liked it.
Thank you. So there were actually a couple that we got mentioned by Tim in the community, and I wondered if we could just give a summary or some feedback on each of these. Tim's in the chat, and so I thought it'd be good to. Normally we go for. We try and focus on issues, but actually we've done a good job of triaging a lot of the issues, and now we're starting to get to the hard things that need talking about.
So, right. So both of these have discussion on the issue, and I've linked that and labeled that. So I think for both PRs, it makes sense to discuss the issues. I just put them on both on the end of the chat, the comment that I think are relevant. And so it's sort of like extended PR feedback and sort of like a discussion of whether this is the direction we're going. But I think that's the way it makes sense to have this discussion rather than talk about the PR directly. And like if we decide.
So which is the issue for this one? There's two that you've linked.
That is not one of the two we have a good issue for. There are two we have a good issue for and one we don't. I'm sorry. So
the one I picked off was just the first one that was mentioned here, the squash all layers. Is that the one we don't have a good issue for? It's just a pull request.
Yeah. And then there are two that we do have a good issue for.
And is that the filter unrelated fixed versions? Okay, so let's focus on that one first then. And
and the issue that's linked, the last comment has a good needs discussion summary.
Sweet, thank you. Sorry for clearing that up. I was not focused. Okay, so Where were you? You were down here at the bottom, right?
Yeah, right. So the
Sorry.
comment is, so the background on the issue, to give a little bit of a background, is we enabled fixed versions for a bunch of NVD stuff. And there was a CVE against the Java runtime itself. And it was fixed. I guess it was severe enough that it was backported to a bunch of old Java versions. And so Grype's output will say, you have, Java version 17 in this image, and your vulnerability is fixed in version 8.2 and 11.2. And I think the opener of this issue really reasonably pointed out, like, that's super confusing to users. Like, no one is going to go from Java 17 to Java 8 over this issue, and no one should. But on the other hand, it's not obvious to me as a vulnerability scanner that, like, I should have opinions about what upgrade path the users should take. And so that's why I marked it as needs discussion. And the PR implements a very simple fix, which is basically Grype will only report fixed versions that are upgrades, is what the PR does. And I wasn't sure that's what we want Grype to do, which is why we're having a discussion of the underlying issue instead of a discussion of the PR.
Gotcha. Thank you for clarifying that, Will.
That's the background there. I enumerated some options that I think make sense in my last comment, which is like the second to last comment on the issue. So we could print all the versions that have a fix. That's what we do today. And that makes Grype know less about the underlying issue, right? Like, the Grype database says, here's a patch, here's a patch, here's a patch, here's a patch. You know what you're doing, you choose. And that's what we do today. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. And then we could do some sort of, like, we could only display upgrades in the table output unless no upgrade is available, and we can only display upgrades in all output, right? Like, so one of the questions is, like, should the table output be simplified, like to just include the nearest upgrade, or just include upgrades or something? And then should they all still be in JSON? And then we could try to guess the best upgrade. And Tim replied and said we should try to guess the best upgrade, I think. And I think we can't, because I'm not writing your software for you, and I don't know what you're trying to do. So I think that I put option 4 in there as, like, I don't know. In my mind, option 4 is untenable, because I don't know, like, maybe the org is dying to upgrade the JVM anyway. Maybe you have only been using Java 17 for a week. You haven't used any of the new language features, and you should just roll back to the highest patched 11. I can't possibly know that as like at compile time from Grype. So I don't think we can do 4. I think 2 makes a lot of sense, but there's also the edge case of, like, what if there's no upgrade available? Like, you're on version 11 and there's a patch for 8, but not a patch for 11. Like, we should, in that case, I think we have to suggest downgrading, because if you've decided you must fix the CVE, then downgrading is what you got. And so I think there are a lot of edge cases to this. And I would like to propose a tentative vote for the current behavior, because I don't know what consumers of Grype are trying to do with the information, and I don't see any good reason. I don't feel like I know enough. Like, I have a vague opinion that upgrading software is better than downgrading software, but I don't know that you hold that, and I don't know that hiding the possibility of a downgrade to fix a CVE is what I want to do in a tool that has to work for a large number of people in a large number of contexts. So I kind of propose 1. Chris has his hand up.
Yeah, I just want to put a small, like, +1 on the first option, because I've experience at my old job where we had an issue where we had someone who was asking for a security fix, was like, what are all the options? And we said, there are no options. No one has released a patch for this. We cannot upgrade. We can't do anything. We are all here stuck. And we sat with that for a very long time until someone did the research and goes, hey, I think we can downgrade. And this version actually is not vulnerable. It doesn't have the patch, and it still is compatible with our behavior. Having that information, like from the get-go, that would have been the correct decision to do in the immediacy. And so there were more times than not when I was able to perform a downgrade that did a patch that allowed us to keep functionality for like the production behavior, but still be like safe, like do like a rollback. It's something that I wanted in a vulnerability scanner when I was working there. And removing it from Grype now, I feel like we'd be removing at least one person's use of the tool. And that for me is kind of like, I don't like doing that. If I've personally experienced this in the past, and I can reasonably assume one person is using this like API behavior, I don't want to just deprecate it and go and get rid of the downgrade option.
There is an extra comment from Tim. Tim's in the chat. Hello, Tim. Asking their main question is about how to proceed further because they're stuck regarding the fielding location. I realise we're kind of talking around the pull request rather than talking directly to it. Apologies, Tim. We're trying to clarify the best way to move forward as well.
I think there might be some asynchrony. I'm not sure that question is about this.
Oh, is it not? It's about the other issue, is it? Okay.
Oh yeah, that's about the squash
it's
layer.
the other one. Is the squash layers, isn't it? Yeah. Apologies. We'll come back to that.
I mean, just to throw more opinions into the ring. I mean, I would say if I were using this tool, the most expected behavior that I would see is if I scan something that has a particular version, the most expected behavior that for me would be to see upgrades that have fixes. With the one caveat that I heard Will talk about, a bunch of different edge cases, one of which could be there aren't any upgrades that fix the problem, but there are downgrades that fix the problem. Like, I think to me that would be like the most expected default behavior. But then like definitely acknowledge, especially with Chris, you said that like, there should be a way for me to get that information. So like having, a flag option or whatever, sort of some way of getting that. But I mean, that's pretty like, we do that for a lot of things in Grype, right? Like to try to filter to the things that we want to see. So like, this is another filter to the things that I want to see option to me.
Yeah, I think.
Or if there was perhaps even a way to annotate, like this, another way of thinking of this is like show all the information, but annotate the one. Like if we had this function that said, here's the one we think is the most expected, like it's the next logical upgrade. If we had that function and we're sort of comfortable with it, I could see it being added as an annotation to the list. Like it's like, here's the 10 versions that don't have this vulnerability, and star, this is the one that's probably the one that makes the most sense given the version you have that we matched against.
Yeah, and that's a.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Alan. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to mention Tim's commented that they've got an example that's similar. This one here, where it's in their comment from a couple of weeks ago, where they say the fixed version has, numbers that don't correlate to the JVM version that they're currently on.
Right,
I mean,
this
Yeah.
is kind of what Will said. Right
That's
here,
exactly
right?
it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that like it would be surprising if someone decided to downgrade from Java 17 to Java 11 to fix a CVE. But it would also be weird for the tool to know that that's possible and not tell you. And I'm not sure which weird we want to live with. I really like Dan's suggestion of saying, like, having a star or like a bold, the one that's like, this is the smallest upgrade. Like, you're on Java 11, this is a patch release of Java 11, it's a later patch release of Java 11 than your one you're on, you should do this one. And like you don't have to do it. The other ones are still there, but one of them is like highlighted in some way. That sounds like you kind of get to have your cake and eat it too, where you can say, like, we're not confusing users by suggesting absurd upgrades, but we're not hiding information.
Right, so that's this
Yeah.
example here, isn't it? Like, where they're currently on
Yeah.
whatever it was, 17 point something, and these are the fixes, the fixed versions, right?
And somebody might be trying to make the case as an org to move to Java 21, and they want to see that 21.04 in there. And somebody might be like, I just want to click upgrade to the next patch version of Java 17 and get on with my day. And I don't really know which person Grype is talking to, but I like the idea of doing something to show, like, to emphasize the sort of smallest upgrade that's a fix from a Sember perspective. Is there anybody who doesn't think that's the right answer? All right, go ahead, Alan.
I was about to say I'm also in that boat. I was trying to think through, like, hey, how does this look in the database? How does this look? Like, how will this work for JSON output? And yeah, I mean, to answer some of the comments from earlier about the downgrade, like, downgrade is totally a valid solution. We're going to need to be able to show folks downgrade paths. Like JVM just happens to be one where you probably won't, but where every JVM example, you could find another one where you could. And I think JVM just happens to lean in the direction of downgrading. It doesn't work. So I like the end suggestion, but I want to add one more thing to this, which is, I think for folks that have the JSON output, there should be something here for this too. Or for the table output, maybe it's configurable. It's like you can make it, it highlights it by default, but you could say, like, filter non-best upgrades or non-applicable upgrades. So
allow
for folks that are
downgrades. I guess it's just allow downgrades, right? Because if you want to go, it's quite natural to go from 17 to 21 or 17 to 17.02. It feels less natural, and I know it's just software and they're just numbers. It feels less natural to go backwards, but if you're feeling always be moving forwards, then having a switch that says allow downgrades and just show me the numbers that are lower might
I would say that there's yet even another switch on top of allow downgrades, which is because what we're seeing here in this data is this is backporting in multiple version lineages, and like you kind of want, like, hey, allow downgrades, or hey, look at the smallest major version, the one that applies to my version lineage, and
right.
And we're kind of in this thing where it's like looking at both sides of that might make some sense. There seems to be, I'm in the agree. So sorry, summarize. I agree with Dan. I think there's even more here to look at for configuration wise and for consumers of JSON, because I think if we just fix this table wise, we're going to immediately get a question: how do I, like, from a machine readable approach, like, be able to consume this? And so I am
okay. Let's.
Okay.
I'm going to put a comment on the issue. So I added an option 5 to my original comment that was like show all fixes, but highlight the guess in the UI in some way. And I think so I'm going to add a comment. We discussed on our live stream.
Nice.
And you want to just move on? Okay.
I was just thinking, if you're typing,
comment.
we can, yeah.
I can add the comment.
I was just going to ask, are we done with that? If I noticed, Dan, you unmuted. Did you have anything else to add, or are you done? Okay, cool. Thank you, Will, for driving that, and everyone else for your input. Do we have another one from? There was the other one, the squashed all layers. Did we have a comment about that one, or?
There's another one that I think hadn't specifically been highlighted, but that I think is related.
Which one's that?
It is 2989. And again, there's needs discussion. There's a PR. The question is sort of, is the PR the direction we want to go? And there's a long comment from me at the bottom about the context.
Sorry, 2989 in which?
Grype, sorry. Or in, no, sorry, this is Syft. I was trying to get a link and I can't talk and get a link at the same time, apparently. No, I can't find the Zoom chat.
Boom. In that one.
Yeah. So this is an interesting question. The background here, we have so Syft has a file metadata cataloger, where you can basically capture things like the permissions mode and a checksum and some other like metadata about each file. And so if you want to know, like if you want your SBOM to contain like a hash of every file, you can set the file metadata cataloger to all. You can leave it in the default position, which is we will collect metadata on files that are owned by some package we detected. And then you can also set it to none, which is where we do not collect metadata about files. And you can set it to none as sort of a performance improvement because we're not going to go hash a bunch of 10 gig files or whatever. Syft will run faster. And this user has a question that they set the selection to none, and this makes the files array in the Syft JSON output is still not empty. And I think that this is pretty surprising, but I also think it's correct, which is why I wanted to discuss it. So if you scroll down to the last comment, I tried to add a bit of a summary here. So we basically I made SBOMs of Alpine latest with none, owned, and all. And if you scroll up a little on this comment, we're sort of in the middle of it. So you can see that we have 77 files, both with it turned off and with only packages on. And the reason for that is that it's not the metadata cataloger finding those packages. It is like in this case, the APK cataloger is finding those files. And so those files aren't reported by the metadata cataloger. And if you turn on all, it finds every file. So there's a good many more files. And then the other difference in behavior so from this perspective, like owned and none look the same. But then if you look at what keys are present in the file, you can see if we have none, we just have an ID, which is like a unique ID within the SBOM, and a location. So that's it. The file is just a path, and we number the entries so that you can tell them apart. And then with owned, we get some metadata about the files. And then with all, we get metadata about the files. And so right now, the effect of setting Syft metadata file cataloger selection, whatever the environment variable is, to none, is that other Syft catalogers can still raise up files and do, but those files are not hashed. We don't capture like the perms mode string or whatever. And the reason I think this behavior is correct, I scroll down a little, is that we use file relationships for other features. And I think we could make it so that if you set the file metadata cataloger selection to be none, that we just drop the files key from the SBOM entirely. But that means we lose the ability to detect overlap by file ownership. So for example, if you do like yum install curl, then the binary classifier cataloger will basically run strings pipe grep essentially on a file at like user bin curl and say, this looks like curl version 7. And then it'll also find an entry in the RPM-DB for curl version 7. And we can say, hey, there's an RPM file, there's an RPM package that owns the file user bin curl, and there's a binary package that owns the file user bin curl. These packages are the same because they overlap by file ownership. And I'm worried, and I think it would be really surprising if turning off the metadata cataloger broke that feature. And so that's why I think that the way it behaves now is important. But I wanted to raise it for discussion because I also think it's pretty surprising that if you set the metadata cataloger selection to none, you still get a pile of information about files in the SBOM.
Is it just poorly named, or is it poorly documented, or is it, we've set expectations that people, or people are making assumptions or something? What do you think?
I think the name is leaning pretty hard on the word metadata. It's not the Syft file selection, it's the Syft file metadata selection. And metadata is one of those words you just read past because in many contexts it doesn't seem to mean anything. That's my theory, is that it's a little bit of like, we're trying to make too fine a distinction with too short a name or something. I think Alex was about to say something.
Yeah, because I want to go back to the last thing you said, because I want to make certain it's not, I hope it's not true. So if we don't put files in the SBOM, you were saying we might break the ownership overlap detection. If that is true, that breaks that functionality, that's actually a bug, and we should fix that, because I think how that should work today is we look at that primary evidence that's sitting on the package to do those detections. We actually don't look at the relationships for that.
Okay,
so like
and then
yeah.
Okay, so then we emit a relationship that's like overlap by file ownership, but we look at the metadata because I know that like one of the pieces of feedback on the PR was the files are being removed too late, and there are relationships that point to orphaned files, and so I had the understanding that like one of the paths forward on the PR is to like not emit relationships about files, and that's the step that I was afraid would break this, because I didn't think we would. I thought we detected that later. I could just be wrong, and I just wrote all this because I'm wrong.
Someone correct me if I'm wrong. Is the ownership overlap? It's a package to package relationship. Is that true?
It's.
I gotta look it up.
I thought it was the way Will described it, that it uses the relationships to the files, and it finds the same file has a relationship to multiple packages, and the packages fall into the categories. Really
Got
should
it.
look at.
Okay,
Got the
so
link.
then to the code specifically.
Oh yeah, I thought you were grubbing through code. Sorry.
I'm starting to.
Okay.
No, we're looping over. Let me get a GitHub link.
Thank you.
Open in GitHub, everyone.
It's packages.
Is it? I just reached the.
Yeah. Because we're using
is it?
parent ID and child ID to identify the parent and child IDs. I'm pulling the link. I'm putting it in Zoom.
But we're
Yep, that's
looping
the
over
same.
the relationships.
Yeah, but
But look at the catalog package parent ID is being used to access parent and child, and then parent and child is what's being used to build that relationship on 71 and 74.
So, I'm sorry, can you scroll up? Okay, so edges is append artifact by file relationship. Ownership by files metadata is a set of files. So where is this source? Because we're looping over a thing called files, which made me think we needed the files.
it's the next function below this. So we're like, take the catalog, and then we get these relationships that find ownership by files relationships. Yeah, this function here is the one I think we need to take a look at. This is looking at package.owned files. So that's like, it's saying the package metadata, does it implement the owns files file owner interface? And then the packages by path is looking at the catalog, looking at package locations. Like, did we find these packages from, like, so this is like package locations. This is the evidence that this package even exists. So we're like kind of finding the Venn diagram between those two things. So note that that's like, something from a package,
Right.
something from a package.
Okay, so that's interesting. So we sort of put. It sounds like we have file information in like two places in the SBOM then, like the APK cataloger or the RPM cataloger. Like the package metadata has a set of files, and the files array in the Syft JSON has a set of files, and we use the one in the package metadata to have the we use the one in the package metadata and not the one in the relationship. So we could delete the whole file relationship and be okay.
Yeah. And
Okay.
and they're not actually dupes, so like the paths are duplicated. Totally agreed. So the files section of the SBOM is meant to be like, here is, or let me start with the other one. The package metadata, if you see like file ownership there and paths, that's like, I catalog something from like the RPM database or, from somewhere else. And these things claimed they own this stuff, and they're just strings. We don't even know if those paths exist in the container, if this is a container, for instance. Whereas stuff that's in the file section of the SBOM, those are only things that exist. We know which layer they exist from. They have IDs that make them addressable in the SBOM. And this is where we attach other known things about those locations, such as like executable information, et cetera. So that's like more stuff can get like popped on there based off of file cataloger. So like the file section is like a elevated thing. The stuff sitting on packages is just whatever those package ecosystems claimed about files, but like they're not.
Okay.
We don't know if they're true. So
Okay. But we use the ones that are sitting on the packages and not the ones that are sitting in files to compute ownership.
Yeah.
Ownership overlap for the purposes of deduplicating. Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I didn't realize there were distinct, because there are also like contains relationships from the RPM to the actual entries in the file array. So then this PR is not as blocked as I thought. Do we want to try to carry on and figure out how and whether it should go forward?
I think the overall comment is still blocking. In other words, I don't think the PR was looking at. Sorry if I lie. I need to go look at the PR again. I don't.
Which
think
PR is it? The
relationships.
3132.
This one.
Is
Yep.
it that one?
Yep, that's the one.
Thank you.
I don't think this was looking at relationships and filtering
Right,
out.
and that was the
Yeah.
feedback. So there's the feedback on this PR was basically you're leaving dangling relationships. So you need to either keep files that have some relationship pointed to them or delete relationships that point to deleted files. And it was sort of, those were presented as sort of equal options. And I was trying to figure out which was which when I looked at this. And so I think it might be faster if you go to the conversation view. There's a comment in here somewhere, but the conversation view will surface it with less scrolling right here. So, right, we're adding relationships already from package to file and file to file. And then we silently drop the file nodes, but not the relationships. So then the SBOM is malformed because there are relationships with artifact IDs to artifacts that don't exist. And I wrote that long comment saying, I don't think we should do the PR at all. When I was trying to figure out which way, because Alex's comment sort of says, like, either like you need to have the files and the relationships or neither, but you can't have just the relationships. And I was trying to prove to myself that one of those was better than the other. And I thought that having both, also known as not making this change, was better. And so that was sort of my thinking on the PR, but I also didn't want to, like, I think the other alternative here is we wire the like file selection toggle all the way through so that nobody emits files if it's set to none. And that's the other choice. And that seems like a pretty heavy change. When I think the real issue is sort of like deciding that Syft is running slow and turning stuff off and feeling like turning it off didn't work, which is not really so that's sort of my vote, is that we shouldn't change the behavior. It's correct today. It's just hard to understand, and maybe we can fix the hard to understand somehow. I wasn't sure what other people thought, though. I didn't want to say that unilaterally.
Anyone else got thoughts?
I will just second. I think the behavior is correct today, and like, so I'll say that for sure. But I think going back to one of the earlier comments about like, why is this unexpected? I think maybe like when you look at the configuration that we have, it's file, but it's actually catalogers, right? But it's like, if you're looking at that from a configuration standpoint, it would be really easy to think that's my file output that I'm getting from Syft or something like that, instead of these are the file catalogers. And if you look at there's like 3 different ones that are each configured differently that may or may not run. So you could set the metadata cataloger to none, but still get contents, for example, or whatever, right? So they're independent, and saying none in the one is like, it's not going to eliminate files, but I think it's a valid request. There could be a way to do that, but it's not this.
Yeah, I wonder if it's worth looking at the YAML, the Syft config YAML, and showing the confusing thing really quick, to see if we think of something. If we can pull up
Something in here, or just when running Syft.
Yeah, if you just did Syft config, it's just run Syft config, and then if you scroll up a bit, there's like a top level file, right? So we've got like Java as a top level thing,
Right,
and right here is like file, right? So if I'm looking at this, like maybe the confusing thing is like, what this is doing is configuring catalogers, but that might not be as obvious just with this naming.
But also the none comment is like is not correct. It says none. Do not capture any files. We are capturing files, right? So that, like, to Will's point, we have to update that. Like,
we could probably fix that.
That's expressly advertising something that we are not doing in that case.
Yeah,
So,
the PR fixes that to say metadata. So yes, you're totally right. Yeah. But yeah, Tomer already fixed that in his PR. So
nice.
Okay, so we could. So it sounds like we should clean up the docs in here and keep the behavior the same.
That's the quick fix, isn't it?
Do we?
In a sense, although we've been talking a lot about presentation, but correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the original intent was to disable this towards speeding up the execution and right. So no matter what we do in presentation, it's not going to address that. And I think that was kind of the root of this, right? He wanted to turn off the cataloger in order to make Syft go faster. And the confusion around what none meant, I think was.
I think so. There's some back and forth on here where I basically said,
it's that one right there.
Yeah, I am trying to optimize Syft running time.
Yeah.
And so I think the sort of the origin of this is, I want to advertise Syft running time. There's 57 files in the SBOM. I don't care about files, so I'm going to change this string to none. There's still 57 files in the SBOM, and Syft is still slow. And so I can definitely see the frustration there.
Yes.
In the PR, this is why he's adding the enable switch.
Yeah, it's above metadata, and the enable switch just drops it all off. And I think I'm now on the side of accepting this, as long as the pruning of relationships and all the other artifacts in the SBOM that are related to files also get dropped off the cliff, and there's nothing dangling left at the end of enable false. Just the full shotgun approach of getting rid of files totally.
I want to put out an alternative.
It's 59 minutes past, so
I'll be quick.
Okay, I just letting you know. I didn't know if this was going to be a tweet size or Facebook post size.
Let me get my novella out. Yeah, no.
Great.
So the right. So Keith was saying that like each of these subsections, if you like show that if you want to show in that config section again, each of these subsections is like a it is a cataloger itself. And well, except for digest, like, so basically you have the same effect if you clear the digest section, set metadata selection to none, and there for content it's already not selecting anything, and then there isn't a way I think to turn off executable. So so that we could add a flag that says like shut off all these, or we could add add something just to executable that says, hey, disable this, and then assume that, that folks need to go and configure the other sections to disable them. Just putting it out there. I don't know what folks thought about it, or if they wanted the mega switch at the top.
I mean, if we're talking about that, I would just like proffer we do have a cataloger selection thing today that is only for package catalogers that could be potentially expanded to do more stuff.
That one or that one?
Yeah, you could do like minus file, and it would happen in the same way that the enable disable switch happened. So that's another path.
Yeah, the other catalogers ended up being de-scoped from that work. But yeah, that's right. We could go down the path of adding those to that path. Thus, we would not need a top level config switch underneath file that says like enable disable. So I think the only reason why, I think the top level switch is functional and good. The only reason why I'm hesitating and putting out as alternatives is because, okay, so how come we don't have a top level disable package catalogers switch, or sub switches there? And,
yeah.
So
like, yeah, we have to if we do this, it's like, do we commit to making this symmetrical across the rest of the application? So it's kind of, but I like some of the alternatives presented are good. I really liked Keith's alternative of the popping it into the cataloger behavior, because that's kind of where it lives right now, and that's the most smooth way to incorporate something like this into the application's already current functionality. We're at 402 though. Maybe we talk about it a bit and then we add a comment on that PR and figure out how to go forward. TLDR, it's blocked. We're really sorry about that. We just can't make up our minds about how we want to go forward on it.
Who's
I can, well,
sorry, go on.
Yeah, I could take action to add more to this PR, whether it be pushing code or adding more comments and helping with the direction, both on the question on like, hey, I don't know how to solve the problem down below, but also on this top level switch. Like, do we want that? Do we want cataloger selection, et cetera? So, yeah.
Awesome.
Sorry, we're indecisive about this at the moment.
It's complicated software. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining. Thanks, Tim, for the comments and pinging us and making us aware that these needed looking at. Thanks, Keith, Dan, Alex, Will, and Chris. And thanks for watching and commenting and all that good stuff. You can find us in the usual places, anchor.com/open source and GitHub and Discourse. Thank you. We'll see you again next time. Maybe we'll have Christmas hats on or Christmas jumpers. Probably not, because everyone seems to be too grumpy for that kind of thing. So
I'm on Amazon right now. That's you just incepted me. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for the inception.
Dan's going to get a bunch of very weird expense claims in the next week.
Reindeer antlers, Chris. Why do you need those?
I wouldn't
Superb.
even ask.
I will let you all go. Have a good rest of your week and see you all next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Bye.